This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit. What do you guys want to talk about?
All right, we're back for another one of these. Here to break out the classics. It is the Five Starr Wrestling Report, coming at you with some fun Friday entertainment today. It is the Classic Review Series edition of the show. And if you're a returning viewer to the channel, then you know the drill. If you're not, you've been missing out on the good stuff. You need to go back and check out the last 2 years of content. Bring yourself up to speed with what we've been doing. Or in the case of our previous AEW reviews, you're really not missing out on anything. The show sucks since day one. It'll continue to suck until Tony has a mental breakdown and the company goes kaput. Could take months. Could take years. But all the red flags are still there. And it's only the die-hard loyalists that are still defending all that crap. But we're here to talk about, well, the material that actually matters. So make sure y'all subscribe, comment, like the show. Come back on Monday because we'll have more wrestling to talk about. Classic and modern content. And I think I just got through the intros in about 45 seconds. Which is rare for me. I could sit here and vent about the commercial I just saw before I sat down to record, but nobody wants to hear me talk about Pampers commercials. Is anybody old enough to remember the childhood tune, if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands? God, no wonder this generation is so screwed up. Sitting there singing at the 3-year-olds. Anyway, what are we here to talk about today? Well, I know Crockett TV's on the docket first. Or Saturday on the Superstation. Or NWA World Championship Wrestling. I don't think there's an actual correct way to actually say that. It's easier for me to say Crockett Promotions than it is Saturday on the Superstation. Too much alliteration, pal. Anyway, let's get into this. And for our cold open this week, Road Warriors killing some dudes. Which is always a fun sight. It's also fun hearing David Crockett laugh at grown men being slaughtered on national TV, and then asking Tony Schiavone, "How'd you like to be in those poor guys' shoes, Tony?" The answer is, I wouldn't, David. Because I actually value my ability to breathe properly. By the way, am I the only one that notices how incredibly uncomfortable Tony Schiavone looks when David Crockett is talking to him and he puts his hand on his shoulder? Tony's always got that irritated expression on his face. The best part is David is totally oblivious to it. Social distance, pal. So, well, right as they're wrapping up their house show plugs, in comes Ricky Santana for a scheduled promo. And he really didn't say a whole lot. But at least he had a suit. Very professionally dressed for the occasion. That might be the only time we actually hear this guy talk on television. And he's here to let us know that Starrcade 87 is heating up in Chi-Town. He's putting over all the top baby faces. He said some stuff in Spanish, and That was pretty much it. Again, probably the first and last time we will ever hear Ricky Santana cut a promo on Crockett TV, so he said to himself, I'm going to make this count, brother. I'm going to go out, give me a nice custom-fitted suit, look really professional for television. Hey, props to him for going the extra mile. Literally so he could just go out there and plug a pay-per-view event he wasn't booked for. What a trooper. And then we go to the ring for our first match. And good God in heaven, it's a new breed squash. They were destined to run me off from the very beginning. But you know what I said? When the first match was a new breed match with Rex King and Rob Idol, when I saw those graphics flash up, first thing I said to myself, it can only go up from here. That was also prior to Tony informing us that Kendall Windham would also be wrestling on this show. And then I said, nah, fuck it, you can give the new breed 5 more minutes. So they're in there doing their thing. Whatever that thing is, I don't entirely know. David Crockett was marking out for virtually everything the new breed did, despite the fact that I believe they're still supposed to be heels, although it's impossible to tell. And while Champion and Royal are working over the job guys, it eventually gets to the point later on in the match where they're actually working with David Crockett at the booth to call their next move. And then finally they hit their botchy-looking double-team combo where I'm pretty sure Champion came down and landed right on top of the job guy's left knee, which did not look pleasant. Here was my conclusion. Hideously boring, but it was still miles better than the Kendall Windham match I experienced later on. And boy, was it an experience. Then we had Ric Flair out at the booth to basically bury the entire first 10 minutes of the show. And if you think I'm exaggerating, I'm not. He called Ricky Santana a, quote, minority, which I think was supposed to be an insult, even though it's factually accurate. He basically all but said, they needed to send me out here to save the show because the first 10 minutes have been absolute dreck. At which point, he did his signature crazy Ric Flair promo, where he told everybody to buy the Starrcade pay-per-view to see the best matches and the best talent the world has to offer. But he did so by screaming at the camera and popping veins out of his neck. And wooing a lot. And that is when I determined Ric Flair should have been sponsoring every WCW commercial or live event or pay-per-view until they went out of business. So many missed opportunities there. Seeing him bounce off the walls and taking off his jacket like a crazy fucker. Yelling that the fans better order the pay-per-view if they know it's good for them. God, that would have been the best. And this promo was awesome. Most definitely. And no, Flair was not wrong with what he said. The first 10 minutes of the show sucked and needed a major turnaround with some big star power. And he delivered. And then it's immediately from the penthouse to the outhouse again, as we go from a raging Ric Flair promo to Kevin Sullivan versus Dave Isley in the most hideously boring squash of all time since, well, most of the matches I saw on that Crown Jewel show last weekend. There was one hilarious spot in this match worth noting, and it was the spot right at the beginning where Sullivan went to hook up Isley in the Tree of Woe. And while Isley is hanging upside down in the corner with his ankles tied up, I can't even say Sullivan charged to the other corner and back. He flailed his arms in the air like a deranged psychopath, and he ran like a drunken soldier to drive his knee into Isley's ribcage. I rewatched it on a loop several times. It was the wackiest thing I've ever seen him do. Beyond that, Sullivan just beat him up for several minutes and then just randomly won with a double foot stomp. At which point, we come back from break to the Starrcade Control Center so that Tony Schiavone could basically run down the entire card. And whereas in previous Control Center segments, we've seen Tony do things like sit-downs and go over video footages and talk about the angles and the big stories, here was just, let me give you a brief overview of the card, some general ticket information, and then we'll move on with the show. Really nothing to say about it, because that's literally what it was. So from there, we cut back to the ring for Sting versus Tommy Angel. Still relatively fresh and new to the scene, so the Stinger fans were not as prevalent here as they would become later on. But he's still Sting. He's a total house of fire. It was actually one of those things where the crowd was pretty subdued for a lot of it, but the longer Sting kept pounding away on the guy, the more the fans actually got into it. To the point where somebody ended up going, "Yeah, kick him in the face, Sting. Yeah." And after he overpowered and threw around Angel for a few minutes, he set him up in the corner for the Stinger Splash, and he got the pin. Still no acknowledgement from the announcers yet that is his finisher, but that is twice now that Sting has used the corner splash to gain the victory. He also did a modified Boston Crab here, which did not lead to anything, but definitely a precursor to the Scorpion Deathlock, as we would see him use later on, once he established that as one of his signature moves. And obviously the announcers were plugging the big match at Starrcade that he's involved with, the big six-man, Sting, Jim Garvin, and Michael Hayes versus Eddie Gilbert, Rick Steiner, and Larry Zbyszko. Still can't get over that. And from there, we go to the booth for a Jim Cornette promo, right before introducing his boys for the next match. He made a baseball reference that went completely over my head, and then he tried to correct Tony Schiavone for a comment he made earlier about Bronco Lubitsch being one of the world heavyweight champions, which Tony denied. Was that something he said earlier on in the program? Because I have no recollection of Tony ever bringing up the name Bronco. Whether it was the Dallas referee or Bronco Nagurski, who I think was the guy Corny was referencing. In any case, we had the Midnights versus Bob Emery and Joe Lynn. And boy, I'll tell you, this Bob Emery fella, boy, did he have a look. I want to see this guy work some more job matches on TV. He looks like someone Crockett Promotions could have done something with. Good-looking guy with some size and decent amount of bulk. Bummer it never panned out. And I'll say one thing about the commentary here. Even though it pains me to hear that the Midnights are currently swept up in a side program with the fucking new breed of all tag teams, it is all worth it to hear Corny's one-liners. I can go for hearing him refer to Sean Royal as a moose with a hernia any day of the week. Beyond that, it's typical Bobby and Stan studio wrestling. Fucking with job guys, humiliating them any chance they get. In the case of Bobby, working circles around them and not breaking a sweat. Just not even trying to pretend like they're in his class. And then we get this great finish where right as Bobby goes up to hit the rocket launcher on, I think it was Lynn, Corny, who, mind you, is standing directly in front of the main floor cam, totally obstructing the view. He flashes up his tennis racket, completely blocking the TV audience from seeing Bobby get the actual pin. So right as Cornette goes over and says, "Did you guys see that?" David and Tony go, "No, we didn't. Because your goddamn tennis racket was blocking the view." Absolutely died. It was even better when they showed it on replay. as Bobby comes sailing off the top rope in beautiful poetry and motion. And then all of a sudden, bam, racket out of nowhere, blocking the fucking view. Damn it, Corny. You ruined a great shot. Well, at least he made up for it in this awesome promo. And what a promo it was. Talking about how the Rock and Roll Express might not even make it to Starrcade in a few weeks, because the night before, they have to survive the War Games in New York. The second most gruesome, dangerous match stipulation, right behind the scaffold match. He says that what constitutes an effective War Games match are the partners you have on your team. And when the Midnights have all but eliminated the babyface competition, that'll leave the Rock and Roll to have to fend for themselves. Nobody to help them. Nobody to bail them out. And if they survive that, then they'll have to go into the scaffold match the following night. And that is where Corny promises that he doesn't want Ricky and Robert to be nervous. He doesn't want them to sweat up enough perspiration to grease the platform, causing them to fall, because that wouldn't be fun. He wants them to be pushed. So translation, he wants Bobby and Stan to commit manslaughter. At least they're acknowledging the quiet part out loud. By the way, for anybody wondering what the fuck that is in the background, apparently the neighbors decided now would be a good time to leaf blow. But it can never be simple. They have to have ultrasonic equipment that's loud as fuck. And of course, it's going to get picked up on the audio because I don't know how to filter out background noise without ruining the quality of my audio. So, what do we have next? We had Ron Garvin versus Alan Martin. Ron Garvin, the NWA World Heavyweight Champion, in case you already forgot, receiving what I can merely best describe as golf claps from the studio crowd this week. Probably didn't help that he had some horseman hecklers in the front row giving him a hard time, flashing up the 4 signs. And the match was pretty cut and dry. Rather tame for a Ron Garvin squash, but he did break out the Garvin stomp sequence at the end. But it really wasn't anything all that noteworthy. Nor was Nikita's promo afterwards. Here's everything I got out of it. He and Ron Garvin are friends, but Nikita wants to be the world champion. Something about the superpowers being unstoppable. And he promises that Terry Taylor will be defeated at Starrcade. This was, at least what I was able to pick out of the broken English. And the fans drowning him out entirely. Kind of like how the neighbors are drowning me out right now with their loud as fuck, whatever that is, equipment they're using. So, coming back from break, we had what might go down as the most awkward segment in Crockett Promotions history. And by all accounts, I should preface it by saying it was a really good Lex Luger promo. But it was also at the same time one of the most forced, unnatural Lex Luger promos I think I've ever heard. Where you could tell he was trying so hard to be extroverted like Ric Flair. Nothing about it seemed organic. It was literally like Flair told Luger, "Did you see that promo I did earlier on the show? Go try to replicate that." And Luger went out there and, try as he might, he went there to do a carbon copy Ric Flair impersonation, and boy was it not a Ric Flair promo. I mean, he's doing all the right things. Plugging Starrcade, yelling into the microphone, talking about what he's going to do to Dusty. But at the same time, he's taking off his shirt, walking Tony over to the ring apron. At one point, he tries to do a semi-flare flop onto his back, and talking about what Dusty's going to look like after Lex finishes him in the cage. I was like, what is he doing? Is he having a conniption right now? Is he having a seizure? Should we call the authorities? You get all these camera shots of the girls in the crowd looking either confused or totally apathetic. I did know, too, one of his quotes here was saying that Tully and Arn are going to destroy the air of invincibility surrounding the Road Warriors. Destroy the air of invincibility. He actually said that. The fuck does that even mean? I mean, God bless Luger. He's really trying, you know. But it is so transparent. The more I watch of him as a member of the Horsemen throughout 87, it was such a weird fit. Like all the promos he did with them, the segments he was involved with. Am I the only one out there that's just watching this again and thinking there was something really off about the whole thing? Lex Luger is a fourth horseman. And I like Luger. But to be blunt with you, because I know we're talking about his current run in the WWF in the mid-90s, and he's totally in the clock in, clock out phase by this point in 94. I honestly think the gives no fucks Luger is far and away better than when he's actually trying. Because when he's trying, it shows. But when he's out there totally phoning it in and not caring, kind of like the tail end of his WCW run in the late 90s, early 2000s, where he just totally tapped out and realized this place sucked and it was a sinking ship and there was no saving it. Like, he was great. He was like the best personality on the whole show. Like, I remember some of the latter stuff Luger did in WCW when the company was in total shambles. Meanwhile, Luger's kind of like the best promos of his entire career at that point. Totally going through the motions and making a mockery of everything. It was great. I love that shit. And I like some of the stuff that's coming up with Luger in the next year or two when he really breaks out of his shell. But man, this period in 87, where he's just trying to fit in with the cool kids, that's kind of how it comes across. He's there. He's involved with all the top guys, but he's an oddball. He's the, what's the M&M joke? Or the Skittle joke? The off-color Skittle and the rainbow. Whatever you want to call it. I'm probably the only one that notices it, but it could be just me. So then we had Hiro Matsuda killing Rocky King with a sleeper hold in a couple minutes, while JJ looked on intently. That was literally all I got out of it. There was some mild choking going on, for those that wanted the full book report of the match. Speaking of stuff I didn't get much out of, Kevin Sullivan did a promo where he basically spent 5 minutes cutting the promo for Dusty to sell the match with Luger at Starrcade. And if you think I'm joking, that is what happened. Kevin Sullivan did an inset promo for the Dusty Luger match. Why? I have no idea. He told Luger that his career is on the line because it's his reputation that's at stake, in addition to the title. Dusty already has a proven legacy, but Luger is still trying to establish himself. And if he loses, then he goes right back down to the bottom of the ladder. And then he said something about Dusty's career living on through the year 3000, when wrestling fans will still be talking about him. Yeah. We'll see if there's even a wrestling business period by the year 3000, Kevin. I mean, we'll be long gone by that point, but hey, it's good to be optimistic about the product. Lord knows we need it. So Ricky Santana wrestled Rick Ryder, which was a complete nothing happening match up until the last 20 seconds when it became the greatest segment in the history of television. Okay, so they're doing this match. It's the most boring match you can possibly imagine when you see Ricky Santana versus Rick Ryder on paper. They're laying on the mat in stationary holds. Ricky's cranking him in an arm wringer. It's like watching a 1940s match. And that goes on for a while. There was a spot where Santana dumped Ryder on the back of his neck and almost killed him. But then he just went back to work in the hammerlock hold again, and I immediately got bored. And then right as Santana is setting up for the finishing sequence, somehow David Crockett gets on this random tangent about Tony Schiavone doing contests for female fans last year, where he apparently sent out roses or something. I had no idea what the hell he was talking about. Maybe it was a reference to the Rock and Roll Win-A-Date contest, because I remember that when they ran that during the summer of last year, which was also very awkward. But David tells Tony, and for any girl who has a 21st birthday coming up, Tony's going to send you free roses. And there's a pause. A very long pause, in fact. And finally, Tony breaks the silence by just going, all right. This show is fucking incredible sometimes. The most baffling shit happens on this show at the most random times. And it always catches me off guard. Like, of all the things to talk about in this match, this is what David Crockett decided to bring up. Even Tony responded like, what the fuck is this guy going off about? Amazing. And you know what? I will take David Crockett over anybody calling wrestling today. Put David Crockett in the color commentary booth on an AEW show. Dude. 5 stars. Let him and Tony have their moment in the sun again. And kick Sockface to the curb. Oh boy. And then we had the next segment. So we go to the interview podium. And it's none other than Sting! And God, this promo. It was truly something else. A fabulous train wreck TV moment if there ever was one. It was... I mean, on the one hand, if we're being objective about it, it's got to be an all-time horrible segment. Just because of how incredibly long-winded the whole thing was to watch in real time. But then on the other hand, because Sting is a guy who's going to become a massive star, you look back at it and you're like, only Sting could have pulled this off. Here's the entire segment. He's at the booth. He's talking about Chi-Town Heat with Tony. Literally fumbling over himself trying to get the words out. So in order to break the awkward silences, he would just randomly insert a, yeah, or an, ow. He goes, my fever is not a normal 98.6, Tony Schiavone. It's 104. Because I'm jacked. Ow! And then Tony would try to interject to ask him a question. And Sting would immediately cut him off by saying something else. Again, losing his train of thought midway through. And then going, ow! God, this is fucking amazing. These are the moments I live for. Then we get the greatest commercial pitch too. Sting wraps up his thought, and because he's so wired, Tony has no idea what to say. He's lost all control. So they stand there together, And Tony looks at the camera and he smiles. And about 10 whole seconds of awkward silence goes by, and then they finally pitched a break. It was like Vince booked it. You say your line, and then you stare awkwardly into the camera for an extra 10 to 15 seconds to make everybody feel uncomfortable. If I didn't know any better. You have to try to find this somewhere if you don't have the Peacock subscription. It's astonishingly bad, yet so great at the same time. I'm convinced this was the moment Sting won the people over. This one promo. So then we come back for a fired up Nikita Koloff squash. He beat a gladiator in a few minutes with a sickle. That was it. Which was then followed with a downcast Ron Garvin promo, where he proudly claimed that he's got Ric Flair's number and he won't change anything about his way of life. Put a paperclip on that statement. He plugged some upcoming stuff at the Omni. Apparently he's going to be signing some autographs and, babyface stuff. He also reminded everybody that he's the common man, so he'll be riding into Starrcade on his beat-up pickup truck, which did not get a reaction. Some tells me rundown pickup trucks were not the rage back in the late 80s. For women or men. I can see that being an issue for a lot of people. And then we came back for the low point of the show. We're an hour plus in. We're about reaching the fatigue point in the TV window where I'm just kind of going on autopilot mode. And then we get Kendall Windham versus the other gladiator. And this is where I totally turned on the show. Well, at least for the next several minutes until the segment was over. Fuck, dude. It's rough. I know Kendall was the son of a legend. I know his brother was a big wrestling name. Valuable name by his own right. Kendall fucking sucked. I'm sorry. You just watch him out there and he literally looks like a kid fresh out of week 1 training in wrestling school. He's got mediocre basics at the best. Awkward movements galore. When you look at the state of him, no muscle tone, no body definition, screwed up teeth. Just a skinny, generic-looking guy who happened to have some height size. I mean, he had that going for him. I mean, on this show alone, I've already seen 2 or 3 jobbers that had a much better look than Kendall did. Again, I don't mean to belittle the guy, but God. I mean, the match was hideously rotten. They're just out there doing moves. The crowd's totally dead. You 2 women occasionally chanting something for Kendall, but beyond that, it's crickets. Even these people knew that Kendall wasn't going to be anything in the business. It's not even comparable between him and Barry. You take one look at Barry on camera and you're like, that guy's got something. Maybe not the best promo in the world, but he's got personality, he's got charisma, he's got something. Good worker. But then you look at his brother Kendall and you're like, what are we running, a Make-A-Wish Foundation? Not to steal a direct quote from Corny, but I mean, that's basically what I'm looking at. I mean, he's trying. It's about the best compliment you can give him. He was trying right up until the point he basically left the business in the late 90s. Unfortunately, the growth period was minimal between now and then. He put on some size later on and grew a beard. That's about it. So then we had Michael Hayes and Jimmy Garvin versus Kurt Thompson and Tony Suber. And it is confirmed. Hayes can do the moonwalk to perfection. Not the best wrestler that's come through this profession, but the guy can dance. I spent the entire match trying to figure out what the fuck Kurt Thompson's gear was supposed to be. I've seen the quarter-length ring tights before, but Thompson basically had long black tights that ran pretty much the entire length of his knees. The only thing exposed were his calves, because he also had white knee pads on and high-riding boots. The hell was he going for with that look? And of course, they wind up beating Suber at the end. But it was a basic Garvin-Hayes tag squash. They did their stuff, worked over both guys for a while until Garvin hit the worst brainbuster of all time on Suber for the 3. Perhaps he got a direct message from Dick Murdoch. That's my move, boy. Don't go stealing it. Sure enough, Murdoch was in the next squash with Bob Cook. And you know how I was talking earlier, how sometimes you see the most baffling stuff on these studio shows at the most arbitrary moments? Well, I present to you Exhibit A. Dick Murdoch versus Bob Cook in a completely random studio squash. So Murdoch is now just a full-fledged crazy redneck. He's yelling at Tony and David before the opening bell, slobbering and spitting everywhere, calling out Dusty Rhodes and saying he's going to beat the shit out of this job guy to prove a point. At which point, and I'm not making this up, this is the baffling part I was referring to, they proceed to have a match for the next several minutes where Bob Cook beats the crap out of Dick Murdoch. Bob Cook. Not the Italian Stallion. Not Rocky King. Not George South. Not a recurring job guy we've actually seen many times on the studio shows before that can actually wrestle. Bob Cook. A buggy whipped arm, pale as fuck job guy with no muscle tone, who looks like he hasn't shaved in months. So of course he's in there working over Murdoch. Murdoch is on the floor pleading and begging for his life, while David Crockett's calling out Cook for being a fucking Nimrod and not staying on top of him. Naturally, Murdoch gains control and then starts beating up Cook on the floor, throws him over the interview podium. I believe David Crockett yelled, "Come on, Dick!" And then after hitting Cook over the head with a folding chair, which Scrappy was perfectly fine with apparently, Murdoch rolled Cook back into the ring and hit him with a brainbuster for the 3 count. This was quite the segment. I really didn't know what to make of it by the end, except either Dick Murdoch is the most giving pro wrestler in the history of mankind, or this was a blatant rib on Bob Cook just to make him look like the world's biggest steaming pile of shit. I'm going with the latter. So, we then go over to the interview podium, whatever was left of it at this point, as Murdoch is there to cut a promo, and he lets us know that he had the match firmly in control the entire time, which I would not doubt for a sec. He called out Tony and David for putting over all the babyfaces and burying the heels. He said he doesn't want Luger to be the one to retire Dusty at Starrcade, because Murdoch wants to be responsible for that prestigious honor. I believe he called Dr. Death Steve Williams a, quote, "nothing happening melon farmer." And as he's wrapping up and calling out Barry Windham, a huge wad of spit began to form on Murdoch's lower lip. And as I'm watching this grow bigger and bigger right in front of me, waiting for a literal bubble to burst, I just see this wad of saliva fly out toward the camera and disappear into the ether. The most vile thing you'll ever see on television. He also called Nikita a communist, which seems to be a recurring theme for a lot of Dick Murdoch promos. Because he's jealous that he served his patriotic duty. Meanwhile, the fans are cheering for a former advocate of the Soviet Union. You know, he may have a point. And then we had our TV main event. It is the Sheep Herders versus Gary Phelps and Eric Long. And there were two things of note here. Sean Royal did the most impressive thing I've ever seen him do in his entire career. A very accurate Sheep Herders impersonation. And the other thing of note, it was actually Luke and Johnny Ace in tag action. First time seeing John Laryngitis work in a TV squash. He was rather unremarkable. But to be fair, the match only went 35 seconds. Didn't really have a whole lot of time to screw anything up. But he did have enough time to cut a terrible 30-second promo where he managed to fuck up virtually every word he tried to spew. But that was pretty much the remaining of the television program. What you would call buffer material. You know, the show itself is just kind of more product placement until we get to Starrcade. I mean, by now we know what the matches are. We know the full card. Now it's just a few more weeks of basic promos and trying to sell the event. Nothing wrong with it. Just doesn't make for the most captivating television. Removing some of the iconic train wreck moments we got this week, which were quite glorious. But it was still a fun show. And you can see a couple things they're setting up for in 88. A couple big names dropping in. A lot of young, hot prospects on the horizon. You know, one thing I've definitely noticed in 87 in comparison to 86, definitely has the changing of the guard vibe. Some of the older names are getting phased out more frequently. Some of the regular big names are taking a backseat more and more. And they're trying to keep the focus on guys like Sting and Luger and Barry, a lot of the young rising stars. Just kind of indicating to the people, hey, these guys are the future. Love them or hate them. So, it's just a general analysis that I got out of the show. But, again, they're keeping the focus on Starrcade, and that's the big selling point right now. So, good on them. So, last week on Mid-South, we had a landmark episode with the Heist of the Century polled. Oh, second biggest heist of the century. Right behind Seth freaking Rollins cashing in Money in the Bank at WrestleMania, apparently. Because, you know, Michael Cole has to remind us about that every chance he gets. Now, of course, I'm referring to last week's Mid-South Tag title match with Ted DiBiase and Matt Bourne versus JYD and Mr. Olympia. I'm not going to recap the entire match now. You can go listen to last week's show if you want the breakdown. But we obviously know the end result. DiBiase and Bourne are now the new Mid-South Tag Team Champions, thanks to Hacksaw Duggan's guest appearance as the legendary Gorilla. And because of the tacked-on stipulation to the match, Dog is now suspended from Mid-South for 90 days. Emphasis on 90. Which is where I want to put a pause in the show right now. And everybody in the comments section, I need you to admonish me for the major blunder I made last week regarding that stipulation. Now, I believe I said the loser of the fall would have to leave Mid-South for 60 days. It was, in fact, 90. Yeah. So make sure y'all have that Let me have it. I really butchered that one, didn't I? But with Dog out of the picture for the time being, that gives the Rat Pack a chance to gloat about the title win on TV. So we had a ringside interview with all of them, as Bill Watts is conducting it. And of course, Watts is filling the role of the disappointed uncle, who tells DiBiase that he knew his father very well when they competed in the Professional Football League, and even DiBiase's father wouldn't stoop to such lows in order to steal championships like that. To which immediately Ted denounces his father and tries to play it off like he has nothing in common. Matt Bourne also got to chime in here, crack some jokes about JYD. He made some obscure references to swing sets and brick walls, basically insinuating that Dog was special needs. It was very obscure. And then Duggan made some racist comment about the irony of Dog being attacked by a gorilla. Yeah. I don't think I need to elaborate anymore. But that was all mostly a recap segment. Always fun hearing the heels be douchebags, and poor Bill Watts has to stand there sulking in his misery because he's not going to have Dog around for a few months. And then we come back for our quote-unquote first match on the card. At least that's what it was scheduled to be. It is Mr. USA Tony Atlas versus Bob Stabler. This is also preceded by a Tony Atlas workout video. Slightly less flamboyant than your average Richard Simmons workout routine, but same vibe. Also, Richard Simmons couldn't bench press 500 pounds, so there's that. But anyway, this quickly descended into another angle, more or less, because right before the bell, here comes Hacksaw Duggan to try to show up Tony Atlas. He was not a fan of having to sit through that workout video a minute ago, so he's here to prove to Atlas that gains are purely for showboating. He wants to prove that he's the better athlete, since he played pro football. So he challenges Atlas to a push-up contest, and Duggan completes one round of 20 push-ups, tells Atlas to see if he can copy that without gassing himself out. This is great. I vividly remember this footage. The night Hacksaw Duggan got, to coin a great phrase from Ron Killings, because Atlas not only completes the entire set of 20 push-ups, but he also starts doing variations of one-arm push-ups, just to rub it in. And you know, we've seen this angle in wrestling time and time again. Even Bill Watts called it before Duggan even took the first shot. As you would expect, Duggan tries to cold cock Atlas while he's down, and those guys start teeing off on one another. They actually had a great spot here where Duggan tries to go for the spear, but he literally runs into a brick wall because Atlas doesn't even sell the tackle. And eventually, once you had guys like Stabler and Marty Lundy running out there to unsuccessfully thwart Atlas, the final image we see is Tony Atlas standing tall. It was actually funny because when Lundy and Stabler ran out to try to help Duggan actually refused to help. He's like, no, fuck off. Get out of here. I got this. And then Atlas runs him off seconds later. Should have taken Double A's help while he had the chance. Big mistake on Duggan's part. But yeah, this segment was awesome. Quintessential booking when you're trying to get over a new hot babyface. Boy, did he get over. And then we come back for another landmark/milestone moment on Mid-South TV. Boy, these things are just piling up, aren't they? I'm just now remembering that the show is virtually an all-angle, all-story-driven program. Yet another segment I remember like the back of my hand. So, the match is Ted DiBiase versus what is programmed to be S. Lee. And for those that can't see up close on the Mid-South graphic I made, the scrawny guy there holding the poster with Alfred Neely, that is Pee-wee Randy Anderson. Legitimately couldn't be any more than $130 here. Now, of course, the gag is that DiBiase thinks Pee-wee's going to be the opponent. Turns out it was a swerve. So they're holding up the poster. DiBiase's laughing out loud going, "Who is Stagger Lee?" At which point, who should come out but Stagger Lee? It is a fully covered man in a red and green bodysuit, complete with a mask, and he does every JYD move/mannerism in the book. So now that I've just blatantly spoiled the quiet part out loud, as if anybody couldn't tell from the moment he hit the thumper. But sure enough, he gets in the ring, he immediately starts firing away on DiBiase, ends up hitting him with the thumper power slam in about 45 seconds, and he pins DiBiase clean. And to make things better, he also conceals a gimmick inside his hood and tells Neely to shh, keep quiet, as he headbutts DiBiase out to the floor. Because, wouldn't want to expose that foreign object. An all-time amazing segment, though. Again, I remember it like it was yesterday. The whole visual of Randy Anderson out there topless, looking like a Holocaust victim. Stagger Lee bursting out there and beating DiBiase in under a minute. Crowd's all shitting their pants because, guaranteed about 90% of them already knew who it was. I mean, you really can't get much better than this. This was, again, old school pro wrestling booking. Just utilizing those classic angles that always work and get over from the jump. Really doesn't require a whole lot of thought. But here's the funny part. By this point, we were basically 20 minutes into the show. We've had a sum total of about 1 minute of wrestling. At the same time, we've had 3 great classic Mid-South angles in a row. So, we come back for Hacksaw Duggan versus Vinny Romeo. And the previous 2 matches brought the amount of total in-ring action to about 1 minute. This added maybe another minute. So Hacksaw runs out from the locker room with his head bandaged up. Got the dry blood splotches everywhere. Obviously selling the effects of the beating he took earlier from Tony Atlas. Yet he still manages to barrel through Romeo in under a minute. Even a pissed-off, battered, broken-down Hacksaw Duggan can still believably kick your ass in about 60 seconds. Because, this was back when top guys were actually presented as top guys. And they didn't needlessly go 50-50 with all the underneath job guys that nobody cared about. Yeah, imagine that. It's nice when wrestling used to be taken seriously back in the day. And that was followed with Mr. Wrestling 2 and Colonel Buck Robley versus the Grapplers. One of those all-action-packed matches where they basically did like 3 or 4 straight minutes of nothing but moves, plus a finish. Well, that's the summation of what happened. Babyface flurry, heat on Robley, transition to get the heat on Wrestling 2, and then the hot tag at the end so 2 could run wild for a minute. And then he caught one of the grapplers with a running knee lift and scored the pin. And Watts briefly mentioned that it puts Robley and 2 in line for a title shot down the road. So I guess that was more or less the goal. And we know the history with Wrestling 2 and the grapplers, so they kind of revisited that as one of the focal talking points here. Kind of basic, to the point. Wrestling 2 started to be a little more eccentric with the shucking and jiving and hip thrusting, which would become much more accentuated on TV down the road. think that was one of Dusty's inspirations for that way he used to move around the ring back in the day. And then we had Kamala squashing Jesse Barr, which I really didn't have anything to add. They actually let Jesse try to get in some offense on Kamala, try to catch him off balance with some drop kicks and some crossbodies, but Kamala all but shrugged it off. And then he killed him with a splash in about 90 seconds. And that took us to the TV main event. And just to touch on some story follow-up from earlier on, apparently Mr. Olympia and Iron Mike Sharp bought out a pair of job guys' contracts so they could wrestle DiBiase and Matt Bourne this week for the Mid-South tag titles. Not entirely sure how they swung that, but we'll just gloss over it. I guess the answer is they're stars and the other guys weren't. Okay, fine. I'll accept that. So DiBiase's bent out of shape about the Stagger Lee situation. He's claiming that it's JYD, and he wants someone to put a stop to it because he should be banned from Mid-South for 90 days, which is a fair assessment. Someone ought to probably look into Lee's contract just to make sure it's the real deal. But this is great. Mr. Olympia gets on the mic and tells DiBiase, "You don't know who Stagger Lee is. You don't know who I am. And you don't know who Mr. Wrestling 2 is. So let's wrestle." And this causes DiBiase to get pissed off. And he goes, "Fuck it. Can't argue with that logic. You're on." That was enough to shut him up, apparently. "You don't know who Stagger Lee is. So piss off." And DiBiase pissed off. And so we get Olympia and Sharp versus DiBiase and Bourne in an impromptu Mid-South tag title match. And I will go on record by saying this probably would have been better than DiBiase and Bourne versus a generic set of Mid-South jobbers. But that's just me going out on a limb. All things considered, everything they did was pretty simple, very formulaic. And Bill Watts is covering a good amount of story detail here, so definitely a good match if you're looking for infomercial plugs. Among his discussions about the JYD Stagger Lee situation, he basically inferred that if Dog is revealed to be Stagger Lee, his suspension will more than likely be extended, but DiBiase has to prove it first. There was also a mention here about the retired Brass Knucks Championship, which had been on hold since Bill Watts retired from in-ring competition. But apparently Paul Bosch is negotiating an idea to possibly kickstart a tournament to get the Brass Knucks title on TV again. And a little more on that at a later date. Prior to the big babyface comeback, I did note a great spot here with Olympia where he went to power out of a pinfall attempt from Matt Bourne, and he basically pressed Bourne over toward Alfred Neely to the point where Bourne's ass was directly in Neely's face. And Neely tried to be so casual about it, with just like moving away without making a scene. But he basically had Matt Bourne's entire ass in his face for a good 5 seconds. It was glorious. And, well, the finish is Olympia trying to get the tag to Sharp, but the heels do the reach-around tactic to draw Neely's attention away. So when Olympia went to tag Sharp in behind Neely's back, he obviously did not see the tag, and that left enough time for DiBiase to load up the gimmick glove, and he smacks Olympia with it. Meanwhile, Sharp is being told to go back to his corner. So as Neely turns around and counts the 3, the delay is long enough to where Sharp can't get back in the ring in time to break up the count. And good match. Good finish. I really enjoyed Bill Watts covering a good amount of story detail here. Obviously, his attention is mostly averted to the JYD Stagger Lee situation, and that'll be the main ongoing TV storyline for the time being. It's kind of apparent. But it was a solid pitch for the next several weeks of programming. as we wait to see how more of that unfolds. I think this is definitely a show where if you're more of an advocate of the in-ring product over the storylines or the promo material, it was definitely a step down from the previous few. But I'm old school. I'm naturally drawn to the storylines and promos and angles because that's the stuff that matters. It hits home with me more than it does the actual in-ring action. And the in-ring aspect took a backseat this week, but that's fine. Again, I talk about it all the time. When Mid-South divvies up stuff like that, it's always fun. I enjoyed this episode. Lots of memorable video footage that took place this week. I mean, the Stagger Lee debut alone, I still remember that all these years later. Similar to the gorilla run-in with Hacksaw Duggan. But this is the kind of stuff you clamor for in wrestling. Real, memorable angles and segments that leave you wanting to come back to see more. And this show had a lot of that. It's all just an appetizer for what's to come in 1983, when the real boom period kicks in. But with that, we will move on to World Class. And this is the second week of the Cotton Bowl tapings in Dallas. Now, last week we got to see the big six-man showdown with the Von Erichs, Chris Adams, and Gino Hernandez, and Jake the Snake. Well, actually, we had Bobby Fulton filling in as the special third partner for the Babyfaces, because they had shot an angle with Kevin earlier in the taping, supposedly an injury angle, but we did not see it take place prior to this episode, since things were kind of out of order. But, we definitely saw it this week. And this week was more about filling in the gaps with a lot more of the prelim material on the card. We'll talk about the big featured match in a second here. A sight to behold, if there ever was one. But they opened with Kevin Von Erich and Chris Adams. And again, had we actually seen the show take place in sequential order, we probably would not have been able to, or we probably wouldn't have been quote-unquote spoiled with the post-match angle. But since they already let the cat out of the bag with that, we were sort of just waiting to see the incident go down. The match itself was almost kind of inconsequential by comparison, but all in all, it was a really well-constructed segment. You get Chris Adams on the house mic before the bell telling Kevin that in this already sanctioned pro wrestling match, he wants to wrestle Kevin in a professional wrestling match. I'm not kidding. He wants a clean, no bullshit, no shenanigans wrestling match. Chris Adams. Keep that in mind. So Kevin agrees to the terms. And all things considered, they end up having a very technically sound back and forth match. By and large, Adams lives up to his word from the opening bell. And while they're in there doing their thing, we get to the last couple minutes where Adams actually gives Kevin a suicide dive through the middle rope. And right as he goes to drag Kevin back into the ring, he goes for an apron suplex. We've seen this finished 1,000 times in world-class matches before. It's kind of a standard go-to in the booking finishes department. But as Adams goes to elevate Kevin over the top rope, Kevin counters. He rolls Adams off the ropes, puts him in a bridging suplex position, and he gets the flash pinfall. And like I said, that's all well and good. But the real meat of the matter is everything that happened in the post-match. So let's go ahead and cover that. Dat heat angle, as I noted here. So Adams is flipping out, throwing a temper tantrum, acting like a petulant sore loser. And, basically Kevin gets on the microphone and tells Adams he won the match fair and square. But he wants to put all the previous beef behind them. He's still holding out hope that Chris Adams is going to make the right decision. And all he has to do is disown Gary Hart and fire him as his manager. And it goes pretty much as you would expect. Kevin turns his attention away from Adams for literally 2 seconds, and bam! Chair to the back of the head. Down goes Kevin in a heap. And this is where things get pretty serious, as David Manning runs down and calls out the EMTs, and they show the blood splotches pouring down from the back of his head as they wrap the towel around him. He's barely conscious. And they spent a lot of time on it. They actually covered it through a commercial break, too, while they were doing the stretcher job. It was all very well done. They took their time with it. Didn't rush through the procedure. Everything was by the book. To make you think that all of it was legit. I mean, they even showed all the women crying in the crowd. "We love you, Kevin." Oh, literally, I'm not kidding. Grown adult women bawling their eyes out, thinking this man was deceased. It was absolutely stunned silent in the venue. 10,000 people just sitting there completely shaken. Very heavy situation, but awesome angle. And all it does is heat up the intensity with the Chris Adams feud, knowing that there's plenty more to come with this storyline in months to come. This is just basic chapter evolution, but I mean, when you factor in that Adams ends up walking out as 1/3 of the six-man champions later on in the show, talk about adding salt to the wound. Not only is Kevin cooped up in a hospital bed, but then his brothers lose the six-man championships on the same show. Chris Adams gets to boast about that. Man, they're making the Von Erichs pretty vulnerable right now. Excellent heat angle. Excellent segment. Good match. No complaints about anything they did. Perfect professional wrestling. Wish we got to see more of it these days. And with that, no, that was pretty much half the show right there. Then we come back for the Iceman King Parsons versus Hacksaw Butch Reed, which is a fun middle of the card buffer match. Unfortunately, they went to a 10-minute draw, and we didn't get a proper finish, so that was kind of lame. Could have gone for another 10 minutes of watching Butch Reed be Butch Reed. Standing there calling Parsons Ice Cream Boy. That made me laugh. I was like, what the fuck does that even mean? I mean, watching Butch Reed in the ring should be a viewing requirement for any prospecting wrestler. Like, if you want to learn how to be a heel in the business, go watch this guy's work. Everything Reed does, the facials, the timing, the body language, the reactions. The guy understood the business. You know, the simple things like tossing the Iceman out to the floor so he can hip thrust and shake his ass to the hard cam. And he's just being a dick. But it's so subtle, yet so effective. They also had one of the best comeback sequences here. Reed is trying to pull the Iceman down to keep him on the ground in a chin lock, and the Iceman kept springing back up to his feet after each attempt. And Reed's like desperately trying to hold this guy down, keep him grounded with this chin lock position. And it's like totally backfiring. I don't think I've ever seen that in a babyface comeback, where the babyface no-sold a chin lock attempt just so he can make his comeback. And of course, as the Iceman goes for a series of pin attempts, they sound the bell to call the match off at a 10-minute draw. Yes, I'm sure everybody heard that. The walls are thin. So, yeah, no finish. But that didn't stop the Iceman from getting a few more clean shots in before they cut away. Probably could have benefited from giving them some more time, because anytime Hacksaw Butch Reed's booked on the card, my eyes are glued. It's making me really clamor for those Mid-South shows in 83 because he's coming up. But that took us to the main event. And Bill Mercer covered this in the outros last week, but the advertised mixed tag showdown, Mike Von Erich and Stella Mae French versus Gino Hernandez and Lady Giant, or as her graphic simply read, Nicola. And I was on pins and needles for this one. Looking at the talent pool involved here, I was like, all right, Gino, now's your chance. Prove to everybody that you can make miracles happen. You had one performer in this match that could actually work, and the rest of the people involved may as well have been walking cardboard cutouts. This is all Gino to carry the action. A rare instance where Mike Von Erich was the second best worker in a sanctioned match, and he still sucked. Honestly, though, another instance where the match was almost kind of subordinate to the bigger talking point here. What am I referring to? Well, the on-screen return of Sunshine, who had been conspicuous by her absence in the previous couple months. Well, now she's back, sporting a bob cut. But she's still Sunshine, living up to her moniker. A beautiful ball of energy that just lights up the room anytime she's on camera. And she's arriving in style, beating Ric Flair in jaw-dropping modes of transportation. Sunshine said, "I'll show you, Nature Boy. You say limousines are the cool ways to ride in style. I'm a fly in a fucking helicopter." It was really cool. And they lowered her down onto the football field from way off in the distance, getting escorted down to ringside so she could observe the match innocently. More on that in a sec. For the record, they never really addressed where Sunshine had gone off to. Like, remember, she just totally vanished. You know, Stella was on TV saying that she went looking for her, but that was pretty much the extent of it. Oh, she's back with no explanation. And she was definitely a factor into the finish. So, I mean, they're doing the match. It's beyond hideous when Mike was in there controlling Gino. It was even more hideous when Stella and Nicola were wrestling. I think the only move executed between the two girls was Nicola dropping Stella with a clothesline. Let me tell you, the struggle that went into setting up this fucking clothesline spot, marvelous. Monkey's fucking footballs had more coordination than the girls had putting the spot together. So, well, never mind. I was going to make a joke about Stella. Or not Stella, Baby Doll. Remember how I alluded to the idea that she was never what you would consider a great worker in the business? All the times we saw her on Crockett TV from the previous year. Well, I'm vindicated in my opinion. She's still not a great worker. But anyway, the finish is Sunshine grabbing a folding chair at ringside and smashing it over Nicola's head as she's going for the pin on Stella. David Manning was apparently off doing something else, so he missed the spot. He apparently did not see and or hear the chair smashing off of Baby Doll's cranium. He just blindly counted the pinfall as if nothing happened. It was funny, though, because Sunshine basically connected the chair with the middle rope. I guess you could say the ropes padded the landing, which is weird because even Mercer pointed it out on commentary, basically saying, well, she didn't get all that one, folks. Not really sure why you would want to openly admit that in public. Kind of kills the chair spot angle, but whatever. So, babyfaces reign supreme. Sunshine got to embrace with her auntie afterwards, and she went over to tell Bill Mercer that she doesn't know what her plans are, but she's temporarily back. And she was very happy to be back. Big old smile on her face as she left with Stella and Mike through the crowd. And it was a good close to the show, and giving people the chance to forget about the fact that Kevin was basically put into a coma 30 minutes prior. Oh, but we did get verification before they went off air. He suffered a severe concussion and minor lacerations to the back of the head. But he'll be fine. Was that supposed to be relieving news? I mean, I guess it's preferable to, he's dead, folks. Ugh. No, sorry, that was classless. I shouldn't make a joke about that. But at least the girls will be able to sleep at night, knowing that Kevin will be back at 100%. A lot of angles on this one, though. In comparison to last week's show, which is very much more match-heavy. We had the chair angle here with Kevin. Very well shot angle. We had a fun Butch Reed Iceman match in the middle to kind of break up the flow of the show. And a moderately decent mixed tag main event that was more there to highlight Sunshine's return. The ring action was kind of trivial by comparison. But it was a fast-paced show. You know, definitely had a lot of those older school world-class vibes that I've been eagerly waiting to see again for a long time. You know, nothing on the show dragged. Everything moved reasonably well. Definitely got a lot of moving parts for story development. And that's kind of what you would expect from a show like this. It's not a landmark or major event for world class, but you know, it's just a way to highlight the big storylines and move things forward. Mainly the Chris Adams-Von Erich feud. Kevin will only be on the shelf for a little while, but it keeps adding fuel to the fire. As you got Chris Adams out there celebrating the fact that he's 1/3 of the 6-man tag team champions now. Kevin will be seething with rage. And we'll see what comes of Sunshine's return. You know, she's got to be factored into the Gino Lady Giant saga somehow, so the possibilities are endless. Boy, are they ever. The possibilities are endless with this show. Where do we go from here? How about we wrap up? Because I got to get this edited, and it's a little later in the afternoon as I'm recording this now, so I'm a little behind schedule. So make sure y'all stop back on Monday, because we'll be talking about Classic Raw, Classic NXT, and we'll be doing the WWE SmackDown show, the post-Crown Jewel episode, where we find out the state of LA Knight's career. Is he dead in the water as we know it? All signs are pointing to yes. But we'll see. Thanks for watching, everybody, and take care of yourselves. Peace out.